In today's 7 Days to Die video, we're taking a look at the best melee weapon. Let's get to it. There are a lot of different types of builds that you can do in 7 Days to Die, many of which can make you an absolute godlike being that just rips through zombies like it's nobody's business, no matter what weapon you use. But I wanted to see what was the best weapon we could use if we just wanted to do as much damage as possible, be as efficient with our stamina as possible, slap on some armor, and level up that weapon skill. No books necessary, no special mods necessary, just you, your weapon, and some levels. And in this specific video, we're going to take a look at just the melee weapons. If you all want to see a ranged weapons video, I can do that. But for this one, we're just talking about melee. We got a lot to break down here, a lot of different stats to look at, but let's start with DPS. So I got this nice graph here to help us visualize weapon DPS. And you can see that we have our normal attacks and our power attacks DPS both split up so that we can see which weapons have the highest power attack DPS and which weapons have the highest normal attack DPS. And you can see that if we sort them by normal attack, that our steel knuckles come in with a solid 31.67 damage per second. That's followed by the steel sledge, the steel spear, then the club, then the machete. That would be our top 5. If we then sort by the power attack DPS, you can see that things switch up a good bit. We have the candy knife, which is I think a special weapon that you can only get during like Halloween season or something like that. And then we have the hunting knife, which is at 72. And then we have that followed up with the steel sledgehammer coming in at 70.13. And then the steel knuckles, the spear, and the club. So seeing as how you're probably not going to be always using your power attacks, although you could. However, overall, as far as DPS goes, I think our best bet would be the steel sledgehammer, as it has decently high normal attack DPS at 31 and really high power attack at 70. But as when I do any of these videos, I always get people down there in the comment section going, but what about the stamina per damage point that you're doing? Because that matters. So here we go. We have a chart showing our stamina efficiency for each weapon. We're looking for the lowest bar here in this situation because lower means we have better stamina efficiency. So if we sort this graph by normal attacks, you can see that steel knuckles with their normal attacks are your most efficient. They have a 31.67 DPS and you are spending 0.53 stamina per point of damage. This is then followed up by the machete coming in at 0.64, then the spear, then the club, then the sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is still up there pretty high. If we sort by our power attack efficiency, you can see that the candy knife and the hunting knife, once again, just absolutely insane. The hunting knife uses 0.37 stamina per point of damage, which is just kind of nutty. And that's followed up by the steel knuckles, once again, coming in at 0.45 points of stamina used per point of damage. Moving on down the line, we have the steel club at 0.62, the machete at 0.65, and the steel sledgehammer also at 0.65. So this gives us a general idea on where these weapons land as far as the amount of DPS they can put out and their stamina efficiency. However, we do need to take into account some other aspects of these weapons because damage isn't everything. Damage is great, but it is not everything. And there are some things that can influence some damage that we're going to talk about here in a second. But one thing I need to talk about, because I know people are going to mention it down there in the comments, but what about as you level them up and it increases the damage, or if you increase attack speed? All damage increases across the board in skills are the same for every weapon. So for example, you get whatever increase for steel sledgehammers under their skill, you get the same amount of damage increase for spears, clubs, everything else. Same thing for weapons attack speed. If you level said weapon's specific skill for increasing its attack speed, it's the same for all of them. Also, the chance to dismember is the same for all of them. So because these are the base stats that we were just looking at, if you increase all of them by the same amount, they're still going to fall in the same order, whether you increase their attack speed or damage. It's not going to make a difference because it's just going to increase all of the base stats and they're going to stay right where they were in the graph anyway. Okay, so first off, let's talk about some hidden stats on weapons that they don't mention to you in game. First up, we have sledgehammers. Sledgehammers have by default a 30% increased chance to dismember with power attacks and a 10% base chance to dismember with normal attacks. The machetes have a 100% chance to dismember. Now, you might be thinking, well, they have a 100% chance, but every time I hit a zombie, it doesn't dismember. And that's because of the way dismemberment works. So we need to understand how dismemberment dismemberment works to understand why these are so good. So dismemberment is a threshold based on zombie damage and the damage done to a limb. Now, there isn't specific damage done to a limb. They only have one health pool, but there is some complex math that goes on. There's a threshold for each different zombie and each of their limbs that has to be met before dismemberment can even happen. That's why that even if it has a 100% chance to dismember, a single attack won't dismember a zombie in most cases. In some cases it will if you manage to do enough damage to them when you hit. For example, a steel sledgehammer can often one-shot zombies, normal zombies, in the head, and that is because it busts their heads because of its high chance to dismember, and it does enough damage that it meets that threshold on a single attack. I hope I explained that well. The TLDR is threshold has to be met, dismemberment can happen. Each limb has a dismemberment threshold. So for the machete's case, once you hit that threshold, it's definitely going to dismember. It has actually over 100% chance. As a player, your base default chance to dismember is 5%. So a machete by default will have actually over 105% chance because the skills also give you a chance to dismember with bladed weapons. So a sledgehammer at any tier, doesn't matter, they all have this base 30% chance built into them. Even if you do not spec any points into sledgehammers, your default chance to dismember is 35% once the threshold is met. So what that means is once the threshold is met for the limb you are hitting, every time you hit that limb again, you have a 35% chance to dismember. Now, once you max out your sledgehammer skill, this becomes an 85% chance to dismember, which is much higher than any other weapon, even if you max out your skill in that weapon. So when it comes to ripping zombies apart, your two best options are the machete or any of the sledgehammers. This immediately moves sledgehammers and machetes very much to the top of our list here because of that high chance to dismember. It's not hard on lower tier zombies to dismember them, the little crappy zombies. Even higher zombies can be easily dismembered. But there is another thing that we need to take into account here, and that is bladed weapons and their chance to bleed. And doing a heavy attack on a target will immediately put 5 stacks of bleed on it. So now we need to understand how bleed works. Bleed is pretty simple to understand, and the reason we need to understand it is because this affects our DPS, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. So how does bleed work? One stack of bleed does 1 damage a second for 20 seconds. Every increased stack does an additional point of damage for 20 seconds. So if you do a single power attack on a target and immediately apply 5 stacks of bleed to it, it's going to take 5 damage a second for 20 seconds. And bleed ticks twice per second. That really doesn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things, but I just wanted to point out that it does tick twice a second. The other important thing to note here is that once you have maxed out your skill in bladed weapons, when you do an attack, any attack at all, whether it's heavy or a light attack, you refresh the stacks of bleed. Bleed stacks do not fall off one by one from what I can tell looking at the XML files and watching the damage tick in game. What happens is you get stacks of bleed and then they all drop off at one time. So if you immediately stack 5 stacks of bleed on a target and wait, it's just going to take that 5 points of damage per second for 20 seconds. It's not going to go down to 4 at some point, then 3, then 2, then 1. It's going to stay 5 until the whole set of stacks wears off after 20 seconds. So if you stack a full 7 stacks on a target and you continuously refresh that drastically increases the DPS on our bladed weapons, including the machete. And this is really easy to see if we take a look once again at our DPS chart here and we take a look at the machete. Its base DPS is 27. If we add 7 to that, that puts us up to 34 damage per second, which is much higher than the steel knuckles coming in at 31. This gives it the highest DPS of any other weapon for normal attacks. Now, I'm specifically saying normal attacks because this changes when we start looking at power attacks. So its heavy attack DPS is 54. If we add 7 to that, that puts us at 61. Now, I'm not counting the candy knife here because it's hard to get, but I just added it to this list so that we could just see, it's kind of for funsies, but it does put it below the hunting knife because the hunting knife's DPS is 72 for power attacks, which is kind of insane. Our sledgehammer comes in at 70, our steel knuckles comes in at 63, and then the spear comes in at 60. So it is just over the amount of damage you can do with power attacks with the steel spear. So it would go hunting knife, sledgehammer, knuckles, machete. machete. So now we have a weapon that has some of the highest DPS in the game, can dismember targets extremely easy, and also has another ability that we have to talk about, and that is the slow that you get from the bleed. So there are 3 different weapons that can apply a slow. We have the bleed from knives, we have the stun slow snare effect from knuckles, and we have the cripple effect that is applied by spears. Let's talk about fist weapons first and get it out of the way because it's not that great when it comes to a slow. So you have to hit the target in the head, and it's a 30% chance. Once you hit level 2 in Brawler, you get this ability, and it's just a 30% chance from there on out. Every time you hit the target in the head to apply the buff, injury, stunned, which is the same kind of stun that we receive as players. This applies a 4-second fading snare debuff. It starts at an 80% reduction to run and walk speed, and then gradually over the 4 seconds, actually it's pretty quick over the 4 seconds, reduces down to a 20% reduction, and then it just turns off. So it never reaches full 0. It ends at 20%. So overall, it's not that great because we're looking for consistency and it's not consistent. Moving on to spears. Once you max out your spears skill, spears have a 100% chance to apply the cripple debuff. This debuff can only be applied to things that walk, so it won't work on crawlers. However, it lasts for 5 freaking minutes, which is kind of nuts, and it slows the target's walk and run speed by 30%. Moving on to knives. Knives apply a slow through the bleed effect. So once you get your first point into deep cuts, you have a 100% chance to apply this slow. It's staged at 10, then 15, then 20%. This slow lasts the entire time the target has bleed on it. So if you don't refresh the bleed, it will last for 20 seconds. And as I stated before, you only need to hit the target once to fully refresh that 20-second duration. So the slow that you get from spears is better than the slow you get from bladed weapons. However, if we take a look at the DPS that we get from the machete and compare that to the DPS from the spear, it starts to fall short. So the DPS for our light attacks or our normal attacks is 34 for the machete, and the steel spear comes in at 30. For our power attacks, once again, counting bleed and full stacks of bleed, the machete's power attacks come in at 61 DPS and the spears come in at 60. So you're not getting too much more value out of it for the power attacks, but you are definitely getting more value for the normal attacks. The machete's basic attack is also more efficient when it comes to stamina spent per point of damage than the normal attacks from the steel spear. Not by a whole lot, but it is, and that's not even taking into account the math that would need to be done to figure out how much more efficient it is when you count the bleed applied to the target. These here are just the base numbers as though the target did not have bleed on it. So due to the fact that the machete does apply you with a slow, albeit 10% less effective than the spear, and the fact that it has higher DPS and is more stamina efficient, along with its 100% chance to dismember, in my opinion, this puts the machete above the spear. And this is mainly because there are no threats if you've decapitated your target. So at this point, you're probably like, wow, knives are very strong. And yes, they are, but they're missing one key feature, and that is good crowd control. Because while the slow is great, if you're just backpedaling any kind of feral zombie or irradiated zombie, or if you have your settings on nightmare, they're gonna be able to keep up with you even at that 20% slow. Only when you have your back turned to them and you are running away is that slow going to actually benefit you at all. So you can hit them with a light attack and book it, and they won't be able to catch you. While this is good in a general combat setting, it's not gonna help you that much. Now, we have 3 different contenders for very good crowd control. First up is obviously one that many people love, and that is the stun baton. The problem with the stun baton is that without books and without the repulsor mod, it's very unreliable. Sure, it is possible to stun zombies for a pretty long time. The problem is it's just not reliable. Sometimes it'll pop off when you need it, and other times it just takes too long to charge and you're getting hit multiple times before it actually hits its charge. On top of that, its overall DPS and damage is relatively low. Its stamina spent per point of damage also falls below the steel sledgehammer in both power and normal attacks. Now, there is another form of crowd control aside from stunning, and that is knocking zombies to the ground. This leaves them on the ground for a significant amount of time. You can see that here in this example with the sledgehammer, this zombie is knocked down for a full 9 seconds before it's capable of getting back up and running at me again. That is massive crowd control, and it's pretty easy to knock zombies down and extremely reliable to knock them down with a sledgehammer in most cases, you're gonna knock them down in anywhere from 1 to 3 hits. And that is due to the fact that it is just a random chance to roll every time you hit a zombie with a sledgehammer to knock them down or not, and it is a pretty high chance, coming in at a 75% chance to knock down the target that you're hitting and a 50% chance to knock down targets that are next to it. Now, there is another weapon that can knock down zombies and keep them down for pretty much indefinitely, and that is the clubs. However, there's a pretty big difference here, mainly being that in order to get the 100% knockdown chance on a club, you have to have your club skill maxed out, which is fine because we're already taking into account maxing out our sledgehammer skill. But in order to get that 100% knockdown, the target needs to be stunned, and clubs do not come with an innate ability to stun. Now, everything does have a chance to stun. Theoretically, you could punch a zombie with your bare fists with no special skills or anything and eventually stun it. I tried to find out the exact chance there is to stun, but that appears to be somewhere in the game code and not the XML files. But all zombies have resistance to stun the same way players do. However, zombies don't lose resistance when they take hits like we do. So when we get hit, every time we get hit, it lowers our resistance a little bit for a period of time and it stacks. It doesn't look like zombies have that. It just looks like they have a base resistance and there's a chance when you're hitting them to stun them. And the Pummel Pete skill is looking for the exact same debuff that we as players receive, and that is the buff injury stunned 0-1. If you have Pummel Pete maxed out and you manage to trigger this debuff on a zombie, there is a 100% chance that you will knock them to the ground. But there's two really big differences here that set sledgehammers apart from clubs. As stated before, sledgehammers have a 75% chance to knock down the target that you're hitting every time you swing, and a 50% chance to knock down other zombies that are nearby. This is big because it gives you AoE crowd control. With clubs, however, once you stun them, you have a 100% chance to knock them down. Once they are down on the ground and you continue hitting them, they cannot get back up as long as you are hitting them with heavy attacks. You will consistently ragdoll them to the ground. It applies a KO buff to them, and that buff just keeps getting reapplied every time that you hit them, and that buff causes them to ragdoll, preventing them from ever getting up. Now, it is possible to somewhat pull this off with a sledgehammer. If a target's on the ground and you continue hitting it with heavy attacks, you have plenty of chances to knock it back to the ground. But in most cases with a sledgehammer, once you knock it down and you go to hit it again, it's probably going to die because the sledgehammers just do so much damage. I know some people are going to mention Knuckles, so I'm just going to quickly mention Knuckles. Knuckles do have a chance to knock enemies down. Once your brawler skill is maxed out, it's only a 30% chance. As I stated before we got into this section of the video, pretty much everything can knock things down. It's more about consistency, and the two most consistent are going to be clubs and sledgehammers. So when comparing the two, sledgehammers are going to take it here for this spot for crowd control due to the fact that they have that large arcing swing that can knock down multiple zombies easily. And once again, this puts those zombies out of commission for a considerable amount of time. If you're looking at just single targets, the club is definitely going to take it. That thing is just nasty when it comes to single target damage and just incapacitating the target pretty much permanently while you just beat it to death on the ground. It's just crazy. So taking all of these things into consideration and with all of this newfound knowledge, where does this leave us? Well, if you're just going after straight damage, and that's the only thing you're going to care about here, machetes. Machetes are insane. Not only do they do all of the damage that they do as far as their DPS and their 100% chance to just instantly kill a target through dismember if you're attacking its head, they also do 400% increased damage when sneaking. And we all know how absolutely insanely broken sneaking is. But when it comes to the most well-rounded weapon, the weapon that's going to do insane amount of damage, bust heads like it's nobody's business, as well as give you good crowd control and stamina efficiency, you can't beat sledgehammers. Yeah, they're a little lower on the stamina efficiency compared to some other things, and their DPS isn't at the top of the list. But when we start to take into account all of the other factors mentioned here today, they are by far the most well-rounded, easiest weapon to pick up and use. You don't need any special books or any special mods. You just have your sledgehammer, you put points into your sledgehammer skills, and they're gonna be absolutely insane. So there you have it. Your best melee weapon in 7 Days to Die is actually two weapons. Machetes if you want straight raw damage and power, and sledgehammers if you want power, crowd control, and just overall survivability. I'm gonna end this video with a little special note here just so I can tell who watched the entire video and who didn't. In the end, none of this really matters. I know there's a lot of people that get butthurt when I say that their weapon isn't the best weapon in the game, and it doesn't really matter. As long as you're having fun, that's all that matters. So whatever you think the best weapon is, whatever weapon fits your playstyle the best, that is the best weapon for you. Use it and have fun. I just like doing these type of videos because knowledge is power and learning is fun, and it's interesting to take into account all of these different factors and compare weapons and their abilities. I didn't even know that machetes had an innate 100% chance to dismember, nor did I know that sledgehammers had a base 30% chance to dismember. So I learned a lot by doing this video, and I hope you all learned a lot too. If you did and you found this video helpful and informational, please consider hitting the subscribe button and notification bell so you can be notified when I upload other videos. And if you're looking for some more of my content, you can find a link to another one of my videos on the screen right now. I want to give an absolute massive shout out and thank you to all of my channel supporters for helping to keep these videos sponsor free. You all are absolutely amazing people. If you would like to become an official channel supporter, check out the links in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. If you're shy, you don't like to comment, just hit that thumbs up button and share your support. Until next time, thanks for watching.